Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can analyze the mental health and personality factors that may be at work in the life and death of Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was a famous model and actress who died in August of 1962. Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. So here I'll be dividing up the information by background and mental health and personality factors. So starting with the background, Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1, 1926 in Los Angeles, California. Her mother, Gladys Baker, couldn't care for her, so she left Monroe with another couple within 2 weeks after her birth. Throughout her childhood, Monroe would stay at a variety of foster homes, and at one point, she would be in an orphanage. Some people believe that Martin Edward Mortensen was Monroe's father, but technically her father's identity is unknown. She also used the last name Baker at different points in her life. During her early years, Monroe was described as being shy and intelligent. Her mother visited Monroe often, and they even lived together for a brief period in 1933 after Gladys bought a house. In 1934, her mother was hospitalized with paranoid schizophrenia. Gladys would be in and out of psychiatric hospitals for the remainder of Monroe's life. Marilyn Monroe spent time with various families and at one point endured abuse of a sexual and emotional nature before being placed in an orphanage. After this, she lived with various families until marrying a man named James Dougherty on June 19, 1942. Monroe would become a model after working for some time in a factory. Her husband wasn't supportive of this career, and their marriage was boring to Monroe. The couple would divorce in 1946. She was able to land a short-term contract with 20th Century Fox, and this is when she changed her name to Marilyn Monroe. She had small parts in a few films. After that contract was over, she went back to modeling. Then she was signed by Columbia Pictures, but her big break would come in 1950 when she signed a 7-year contract with 20th Century Fox. Despite the fact that she was featured in a number of films, she was still struggling financially at this point. During her career so far, she had relationships with a number of men, many of them in the entertainment industry, and some of them helped her career. In 1952, she began a relationship with Joe Dimaggio, a well-known baseball player for the New York Yankees. Their relationship was unstable. Joe Dimaggio hated attention, but Monroe loved it. Monroe was insecure about her acting talent, and she started having a number of problems on set, including missing work, showing up late, demanding retakes when she felt her performance was not good, and forgetting her lines. Despite her difficulties, she turned around her financial situation in 1953 and 1954, starring in several well-received films, including Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire. Tension started to rise between Monroe and 20th Century Fox, mostly due to their refusal to let Monroe try a variety of roles. They would suspend her in 1954, and around that same time, she married Joe Dimaggio. Some people believe this was a strategic move to improve her position with the studio. Monroe would travel to Korea to entertain 13,000 U.S. troops who were serving there during the war. Evidently, this performance built Monroe's confidence, although it strained her relationship even more with Joe Dimaggio. Eventually, 20th Century Fox gave in and cast Monroe in the movie The 7-Year Itch. To promote this movie, the studio shot a scene in Manhattan whereby Monroe's white dress would be blown up in the air while standing on a subway grate. This particular scene was the last straw for Joe Dimaggio. He left the set in anger, and the couple would divorce in 1954. At this point, Monroe had more problems with 20th Century Fox and would form her own production company. Eventually, the studio would give in again, agreeing to grant Monroe more freedom in picking her roles, and they agreed to pay her $100,000 per film. So at this point, Monroe was struggling with a few different problems. She was having insomnia and using barbiturates to sleep, and she was feeling insecure. She was really unsure about her own acting talent. She entered therapy to address these issues, specifically psychoanalytic therapy, which is based on the work of Sigmund Freud. This therapy really centers around the idea of a conscious mind and an unconscious mind, and there are these drives that people have that are out of their awareness in the unconscious mind, and those drives affect what happens in their lives, like their mood and what they decide to do. So it's an old therapy. Nowadays, the new version would be psychodynamic therapy, but it was very popular at that time. Monroe would star in the film Bus Stop and shortly thereafter marry a playwright named Arthur Miller. This was in June 1956. He had written several plays that were popular, including Death of a Salesman. Monroe went to England to shoot a movie called Prince and the Showgirl. She had a lot of difficulties on set, including showing up late and being generally disruptive. The film did not do well after its release in 1957. During this time, she became increasingly dependent on her husband. She not only suffered from chronic insomnia, but it's reported that she had mood swings. People described her as being hysterical. She had a miscarriage and an ectopic pregnancy, and she spent some time in the hospital after this when she overdosed on barbiturates. In 1958, she moved to Los Angeles and started working on a movie called Some Like It Hot. She started seeing a new mental health professional named Dr. Ralph Greenson, who also used a psychoanalytic approach. Eventually, Greenson would have daily therapy sessions with Monroe. Some of them would last as long as 5 hours. Monroe's alcohol and drug use escalated during this time and included the use of prescription medications. On the set of Some Like It Hot, Monroe fell into the same pattern of being problematic, except here she seemed to be more deliberately disruptive than she had been before. She caused the film to go over budget, but it was still highly profitable. She would have another miscarriage shortly after the release of this film. During the production of her next film, which was a musical comedy, she had an affair with her co-star. Monroe started working on the film Misfits, which also starred Clark Gable. Monroe's behavior on set was unprofessional, as usual, and caused significant production delays and cost overruns. She also spent a week in a detox program while that film was being shot. Her husband had an affair with a set photographer. Monroe and Miller would divorce in January 1961. Misfits was released and failed dramatically. Clark Gable died of a heart attack in November 1960, just 2 days after the filming of Misfits was completed. He was in poor health, but Monroe blamed herself for his death. At this point, we see that Monroe was hospitalized to have her gallbladder removed, and she had a surgery to treat her endometriosis. She also spent several weeks hospitalized due to depressive symptoms. Some referred to this experience as a nervous breakdown. She was in the Payne Whitney Psychiatric Center and had a terrible experience there. She wrote a 6-page letter to Dr. Greenson where she described the misery of being confined in that facility. She referred to it as inhumane, like she was in prison for a crime she did not commit. Joe Dimaggio intervened and moved her to another hospital where she completed the treatment. They connected at this point for a short time, kind of rekindled their relationship a little bit. Monroe bought a home in early 1962 in Brentwood, California, and she was cast in another film. This one was called Something's Got to Give. She became physically ill, which caused her to miss time, but the studio did not believe that her illness was genuine, probably because she had a poor history in this area. Eventually, the studio stopped production, they fired Monroe, and they sued her for $750,000. However, as usual, the studio changed its mind and signed a new contract with Marilyn Monroe. This takes us to August 4, 1962. This particular evening, we see that Monroe's housekeeper, Eunice Murray, was staying overnight at Monroe's home at the request of Dr. Greenson. At about 3 a.m. on August 5, the housekeeper noticed Monroe's bedroom light was on. She could see it on the door, but the door was locked and Monroe was not responding. Later, we see Murray gives another story where she said she saw the phone cord running under the door. Murray called Dr. Greenson, who broke into Monroe's bedroom and found her dead. Another physician, Dr. Engelberg, would arrive at the house at about 3:50 a.m. This physician was the one who pronounced her dead. She was on the bed in a fetal position holding the phone in her hand. It is believed that she actually died on August 4 at around 9:30 p.m. The cause of death was an overdose of barbiturates, specifically pentobarbital and chlorohydrate. She had a lethal concentration of both substances in her body. It was ruled that she ended her own life. Marilyn Monroe was 36 years old at that time. Now moving to the mental health and personality factors. Because of Marilyn Monroe's fame, there have been a number of conspiracy theories about what caused her death. We see these theories that she had an affair with Robert Kennedy and John F. Kennedy, but we don't really have good information around that. We also see a number of theories about her mental health symptoms. Just to name a few, people have said that Monroe had borderline, histrionic, or narcissistic personality disorder, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, substance use disorder, schizophrenia, social anxiety, and paranoia. So we see a lot of disagreement in terms of the theories. Technically, she was diagnosed with addictive, paranoid, borderline personality and manic depressive or bipolar personality, which is interesting because other than manic depressive, which refers to bipolar disorder, none of these other diagnoses are in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. They're not real disorders. There is a borderline personality disorder, and there's a paranoid personality disorder, as well as bipolar disorder, but there is no addictive, paranoid, borderline personality or bipolar personality. It was like these mental health professionals were just throwing words together randomly and saying, oh, that's a diagnosis. But really, they were conflating a number of constructs. This is actually fairly common with mental health professionals who use psychoanalytic theory. They tend to create these diagnoses that are just different ideas that they had put together as if they represent an official diagnostic classification. So one can kind of understand that was the way it was done at the time, but it makes it confusing because it's difficult to know what exactly was going on. So what could have been going on in a situation like this? Well, let's take a look at some of the events in Monroe's life and some of her characteristics. She had a history of trauma. She had an unstable childhood in general, moving from place to place often, not being with one family for a long amount of time. She had attempted to end her life several times. She had numerous tumultuous romantic relationships. There was a constant struggle where men would try to manipulate her and she would try to manipulate them. Some have said that Monroe was the master of inducing a rescue fantasy. She was intelligent, shy, and insecure. She struggled with substances for many years, not only barbiturates, but stimulants like amphetamines, and she struggled with hypnotics. She had chronic insomnia, a number of physical health conditions that caused her pain. Her mother had paranoid schizophrenia. She had poor work habits, which may have been connected to the insomnia, but she was also disruptive intentionally, which would not necessarily be related to a lack of sleep. She referred to herself as vain in a letter to Dr. Greenson, and she had achieved an amazing level of fame and was under a tremendous amount of pressure because of that. So taking a look at her personality profile, I'll use the 5-factor model to conceptualize her personality. I remember the 5 factors through the acronym OCEAN: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So Monroe had a high level of openness to experience. She was intellectually curious, appreciated art, she was creative and adventurous. She had low conscientiousness, she had a poor work ethic, she was late all the time. She did not care that her behavior was costing the studio money or wasting other people's time. She had high extroversion, she was outgoing, friendly, and assertive. She probably had a low to mid-level of agreeableness. She could be somewhat manipulative. She had low compliance and low modesty. And her level of neuroticism was probably high as well. She had difficulty resisting temptation, like substances, and she also had depression, anxiety, and anger. With all this in mind, moving back to the question of what could be happening with the mental health in a situation like this, we see that this is actually kind of a difficult case because of the confusing information from her mental health professionals. Additionally, her substance use makes the situation less clear, like what problems are caused by the substances and what problems came from another origin like personality pathology. It seems fairly clear that her behavior aligns with substance use disorder, but her psychiatrist made this really easy for her. They gave her way too many substances. Moving to the theory that she had schizophrenia, this would explain paranoia, and it would make sense given her mother's mental health history, but I've not seen a lot of evidence to support this. Individuals with schizophrenia have disorganized thoughts, and I don't get the impression that that was what Monroe had here. Then there's the theory of bipolar disorder. Her behavior does align with depression, and she certainly had moments with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, which could point toward mania, but it's not really clear if she ever had a true manic or hypomanic episode. She did act out dramatically in that hospital that she didn't like, but that behavior could also be attributed to extreme personality traits or substances. Much of the time when considering her behavior, the question of Cluster B personality pathology seems to come to the forefront. Cluster B contains 4 personality disorders: antisocial, borderline, narcissistic, and histrionic. This cluster is known as the dramatic erratic cluster. It's not unusual that if a person has one of these disorders, they have symptoms of several of the disorders. If we take a look at some of the criteria, we see a possible connection to Monroe's behavior. For example, from antisocial personality disorder, we see that she was impulsive and irresponsible. From borderline, we see recurrent suicidal behavior, affective instability, so mood dysregulation, stress-related paranoid ideation, identity disturbance. She never really knew who she was. She had a lot of self-image problems. We see impulsivity that could lead to self-harm, and chronic feelings of emptiness. From narcissistic, we see being manipulative, having a sense of entitlement, and requiring admiration. And from histrionic personality disorder, we see this tendency to want to be the center of attention, have provocative behavior, and consistently using one's physical appearance to draw attention to oneself. It's important to remember, though, that with histrionic, this behavior could have been her playing a role and not necessarily part of her personality. It's always difficult when looking at actresses in light of that personality disorder. When considering all the behavior, the best alignment to the behavior seems to be borderline personality. This makes sense with the substance use, as the two are often comorbid. They tend to appear together. And as I mentioned, it seems to cover the paranoia. It's also consistent with the trauma history, especially one that originates early in one's life, as was the case with Marilyn Monroe. Something else I want to cover here that I touched on earlier is how irresponsible Monroe's mental health professionals were. Some people believe that their behavior directly caused her death. I'm inclined to believe that, although it's been theorized that some of the medications she was taking were obtained illegally. So it's really not clear how much of a role they had in her death. The difficulty that some therapists have when treating celebrities is they tend to get starstruck. They give the celebrity everything the celebrity wants. This appears to be what happened with Dr. Greenson, and really perhaps everyone who treated Marilyn Monroe. What could have happened here with Monroe is that she had chronic insomnia that got out of control. She first experienced the insomnia when she traveled to Japan. Jet lag disrupted her sleep. Then she got into this cycle where she needed the sedatives to go to sleep, but then used stimulants so that she could be active enough to work. There's a lot of pressure on an actress to bring a tremendous amount of energy and enthusiasm to the set. And I think this pressure really took a toll on Marilyn Monroe. So I think she just became stuck in this horrible cycle, and in addition to her mood lability, she just couldn't get a good night's sleep. When exhaustion, substance use, and mood regulation problems combine, it's a recipe for disaster. It's an interesting pattern because it's one we also see with Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson: chronic insomnia and too many sedatives. So those are my thoughts on Marilyn Monroe. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.